Hey guys, it's your pal Joey T from the Cartoon.P, rocking myself a Mr. Incredible shirt. Unfortunately, this isn't the shirt that I originally had in a previous video, which was just a straight up logo. But I'll be real with you, it's kind of a cool shirt. I picked this up at the Franklin Institute when they had the Art and Science exhibit on Pixar. If there's ever a video online talking about that exhibit, highly recommend you go check it out because it was a lot of fun. So alright, enough prolonging, let's go ahead and talk about The Incredibles 2. And that's the thing, 14 years we've waited for this movie. Every time Pixar would announce a sequel, previous to 2014, there would be somebody in the comments section going, alright, I want my Incredibles 2, because that first film created great characters. It was a real genre changer for what Pixar was normally used to doing. And it just inspired a lot of cool animation afterwards. We saw more action-oriented animated films. I'll dare say we saw some good superhero movies come out after The Incredibles. Like, was it me or was the storyline in Iron Man 3 a little similar to the storyline of Syndrome wanting to get revenge against Mr. Incredible? Coincidence? I think not! And it's funny that I referenced that character. He's also a nerdy white guy with glasses with weird facial hair, so it all works out. The great thing about The Incredibles 2, it picks up right after where the first Incredibles movie picks up, which is where they're fighting crime against this villain, the Underminer, voiced by John Ratzenberger, who does all the Pixar movies, does like that one cameo in every film. And the cool thing is you figure it would just start on with what they were normally doing, but then it turns out it goes back to the storyline of the first film where superhero activities are still illegal. So we're at a point where the supers, the Incredibles, they have to go back into hiding. However, the Witness Protection Program, led by the late voice actor Bud Luckey, who unfortunately passed away and had someone replace him, is being shut down. Like, they're really cracking down on superhero activity. So where does that leave the Incredibles? That leaves them with a billionaire who has an idea on using telecommunications in order to showcase how superheroes are not actually causing property destruction, they're actually doing something good. And who they want to start this is Elastigirl, only because in her last exploits, she was the one who wasn't doing that much property damage, compared to Mr. Incredible, who's got the sensitive touch of a bulldozer. So that's just how it is. With that, while Elastigirl is fighting these crimes, Mr. Incredible has to stay home and take care of the kids, which at first I thought would be annoying, very similar to a lot of films with the stay-at-home dad. However, upon really thinking about this, because mind you, I saw this movie last night, and this is my fresh thoughts coming in from my first screening, I actually really enjoyed it. What was the thing in the first Incredibles film that we really didn't get a chance to see that they could improve on? And one of those things was the family aspect. Granted, we saw the family act and we saw them go on adventures. However, we really ever got to see the family together doing family stuff. And you figured that would be kind of weird, but it's actually relatively good. We get to see a little bit more of Violet, not necessarily on what her powers can do, but more so on what she's doing. Because if you really go back to that first film, she wasn't really talking a lot, and she really wasn't doing that much. However, it's safe to say what she was doing in this film, really works for her character. I'm not going to say too much of what goes on, but the framing of her storyline at the start of the film and how it continues throughout actually works really well and helps out her character a lot. And also Mr. Incredible, which I'm going to get into a little bit. Of the characters in the family that we didn't actually get to see the most of, ironically is Dash. Believe it or not, he was the one in the first Incredibles film who was doing all this amazing action, and it really made you think, alright, we got to see more Dash. Sadly, we don't get to see that much of Dash in this film as much as we did in the first film. As far as him being in action, I mean, as a character, it's not bad. And then that brings us to Mr. Incredible. And in some ways, the choices they made with him being the stay-at-home dad, I think work really well. When you really get down to it, who had the most action in the first film? It was Mr. Incredible. Who has the most action in this film? It's Helen, Mrs. Incredible, his wife. So that leaves us with, well, what's Bob gonna do? Well, in this case, we get to see him work with the family. We get to see him continue his character. Because the thing about his character, right, was that he was all about, I got these great powers. I got to do the right thing. I got to be a superhero. While he's hitting this midlife crisis, while superhero activity is legal, and it seems like society is pushing down on him from wanting to do superheroic stuff, right? So at this point, he has to take what he learned from the first film and apply it to being at home and being a stay-at-home dad. And in some ways, that was actually relatively good. I like the way they handled it because some of the dialogue, like some of the best dialogue Craig T. Nelson had was in this film. I'm going to say, though, a couple lines, not necessarily from Craig T. Nelson's character, Mr. Incredible, but other characters, too, did seem a little forced, and in some ways, I felt like there was more dialogue in this film than there was in the first Incredibles film. Like, they did utilize silence a little bit better in that first Incredibles than they did in this film. That's just a minor thing, may even be a nitpick. Remember, I just saw this movie, so what I'm saying as being a criticism could actually be something that maybe I just need to be warmed up to a little bit. I know I didn't really get a chance to talk about Helen, but it's really good to see her in action. I was actually surprised at how much they could do with this character. It's rare that you ever get to see someone with the Mr. Fantastic powers in a movie, and you kind of look at it and say, that's corny, that's lame, there's no way that's going to work. But believe it or not, having these types of powers would be amazing. It's one of the reasons why I would like to see a Plastic Man movie, because in some ways, cartoony animation with this type of power really works well, and it looks good in action. On top of the fact, let's not address the elephant in the room, she looks mighty fine doing it in the process. Alright guys, let's just say. And it's not just Elastigirl looking fantastic, Mr. Incredible coming from a straight guy, he's looking pretty buff too. Remember those first trailers where we saw Mr. Incredible struggle putting on his belt? That ain't the case here. He's a good looking dad. That's all I gotta say. The whole family, Frozone, they're all looking good. Which brings me to the animation. As far as what they've done within the 14 years with texture, with skin, they really came a long way. There were, expressions on these characters that I could never imagine them pulling off with what they did 14 years ago. But with that said, because Brad Bird's style is very simplified, do I think it works out to his advantage? Sometimes, and sometimes not. So for example, you got Bud Lucky's character, who is the agent, who works in the witness protection. I'm just going to say what they did with his character, I think worked out with the limitations of the past than it did into the future, which is ironic because you figure new technology, it'll make it work better. But that's the thing. Brad Bird was working with a lot of limitations, and in that aspect, I don't think his new character design really fit. And it's also because of the voice, because Bud Lucky, as I mentioned before, passed away, so they had to get a new voice actor to replace him. They may even have casted Brad Garrett. Someone in the comment section could probably correct me on that. I'm probably wrong. Seems like Brad Garrett has taken a lot of the roles Bud Lucky did. So with this being a superhero film, you want to know how the action is. And the thing about the action is that it's very good. In some ways, this film is more of an action superhero movie than the first Incredibles. Whereas if you really watch the first Incredibles, it's more focused on a spy aspect, more so influenced by the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Not the lame TV show we got on today. We're talking about old school Nick Fury and the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. from the 60s. That's what that movie was really going off of. And it's weird. And at this, it's just because of the society we live in now where we're craving superhero material. There's just plenty of superhero material that's set in this Silver Age world with a lot of great action, bright costumes. To me, this is just a great send-up to that era of 1960s Silver Age characters. And the cool thing about that too, which I'm going to talk about in my Incredibles review coming out later in the week or the month, still in the editing bay, is that while you can argue, and it says in the movie that it's set in the 60s, that it's not really the 60s. It has technology and they use modern lingo that they talk about today, but not necessarily limited to the past in the 60s. So in some ways, it does feel modern while also feeling retro, and I completely respect that. And in some ways, it does remind me of comic books, because, Spider-Man in the current comic books, 616 universe, we're talking about current Spider-Man, kept canon, he's supposed to be 30 years old, despite the fact that his comic started in the 60s, and it's supposed to follow those stories within the 60s. You get all those one-shot things, whatever. But it's kind of the same thing. You can revisit those comics, or even when they do a certain comic where they do a flashback, they use 60s era, design, but also trying to make it modern. That's kind of what this movie does, and that's why it works for me as a comic book fan. I guess for, general moviegoers, that works too. As far as the superhero stuff goes, there's some things that annoy me a little bit. Newer characters. The older characters, they're well defined. You get to see Edna Mode, you get to see Frozone. But as far as the newer characters go, I don't think they were given as much development as those older characters. Maybe this is because of Brad Bird's investment into the material or creating these new characters to fit this story. But to me, what they had with the newer characters was a little hit or miss. Speaking of which, the two characters who are funding the adventures for Mrs. Incredible, it's weird because one of them looks like a straight up copy of Roxanne Ritchie from Megamind, which which I'll probably talk about at some point on this review series. You let me know. And her brother, who for some reason reminded me of Jason Bateman's character from Hancock. Public relations guy coming in, saving the hero, giving him tips on how to not do that much property damage. It's just funny because when The Incredibles came out, everybody was like, all right, all these superhero movies ripping off The Incredibles. Now we got The Incredibles taking influence from other superhero material. I just think it's interesting. There's one character in particular that I actually thought was done really well, and that's Jack Jack. Here's the thing though. The funny thing about Jack Jack's character, if you saw the original Incredibles short Jack Jack's Attack, I think that's what it's called, where you find out about his powers, it's almost like this movie does reference that short that maybe not a lot of people have saw. Like, for example, I'm not going to spoil what happens, but Witness Protection character does something so clearly within that short that doesn't happen in the movie that some people may be confused by, but some people may not if they hadn't seen it. And that's the thing. It's weird, but it's also good because Jack Jack as a character is amazing. The great thing about Jack Jack's character is that he's very similar to Franklin Richards, Reed Richards, and Sue Storm's child, where he's got all these amazing powers. He can do fantastic stuff. Where it's different though, because he can just manipulate, different powers that other heroes have without even having seen those other heroes. So no, not like Sylar from Heroes. He's really doing his own thing. And I think it works really well because when you see him use his powers, you're thinking about all these different characters or, all these different references. He's basically the whole X-Men mansion wrapped in one, and it really works. His action works really well. It's funny. It didn't get annoying in a cliche sort of way. I just enjoyed it. And that basically sums up my experience seeing this movie, is that I just straight up enjoyed it. I'm glad I saw it. I'm glad I had to wait this long. Okay, I take that back. I'm not glad I had to wait this long to go see this movie because I kind of wish it came out sooner. And for what I saw, I'm just glad it's here. I hope they continue these stories. I hope we don't have to wait another 14 years. Maybe even a TV series or a spin-off, just something within this world so that we could see these characters. Because the story that was created by Brad Bird, the characters that's created by Brad Bird, it really works. And in some ways, it lays a lot of good groundwork where you don't even need to have Brad Bird be directly involved, just somewhat involved, because all that's been laid out. With a good filmmaker, you can continue these films without having to rely on that. And in some ways, I love this film. I love how it turned out. In this day and age where superhero movies are amazing, it's great to see one that is incredible twice as much. You like what I did there? I'm sure you did. Comment below and let me know what you think. Let me know if you want to see these types of videos on this web series. Let me know what you think. I'm Joey Tedesco. Click that like button, do all that fun stuff, and thanks for watching. Take care.